David Sirota and Don Lemon were on CNN earlier this week talking about the shooting, specifically an interesting racial angle on these sorts of mass shootings. Let's listen to David Sirota.
Why is America 30% white guys and 70% of the shootings in the last many decades have been at the hands of white guys? I'm not saying we should racially profile white guys, but I do think it's interesting to note that had 70% of mass shooters been, let's say, Arabs or African American men, I think the conversation right now would be a very different conversation where we'd be having a much less nuanced, a much uglier conversation.
Do you know the feeling you get when you say something totally smart and then nobody responds to it? Right, well, I had it when we had this conversation the day after.
Yeah.
And I thought I deserved the start of a conversation. Like, what if these guys were Arab? Like,
yep.
Then the whole thing everything would be different. And what David does incredibly well is he doesn't purport to say what that conversation would be, just acknowledge that
there would be one.
Everything would be different because there'd be these crazy Arab terrorists killing our children.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the reaction that Sirota has gotten for saying that. It was met with a lot of awkwardness and like, I'm not sure that's the kind of thing you should be bringing up, and what are you trying to intimate about white people? No, but you heard him. He's not saying that. He's white. He doesn't believe you should actually racially profile white people. But he's saying if it was Arabs, as Ben pointed out on the first day and we talked about, of course there would be a mass hysteria over, oh my God, which Middle Eastern country do we invade? And terrorism run amok, double Guantanamo. I mean, there's no question about that. And if it was African Americans, you think they wouldn't use words like gangbangers and and all the racially coded words, etc. And then this gets into one of my pet peeves that I've been talking about a lot lately, which is this idea that David is alluding to there, which is well, if it was black folks, how blacks are violent. That's the stereotype, right? But how come that stereotype doesn't exist for white people who massacred the Native Americans in this country, who enslaved black people, who did lynchings, who did the Klan?
Germans also white, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about broader white people, World War I, World War II, the Inquisition, the Crusades, and then the slaughter of the South American Native Americans.
The 100 Years War.
And the list goes on and on. But black people are violent.
I honestly don't even think you need to go as politically charged as talking about Muslims or if it was African Americans. If it was Chinese men, if it was white women that had 4 mass shootings in a row, I think that would be major news too. Mm-hmm. Well, any group other than white males would be news.
Well, I mean, first of all, the shooting itself it's not like people didn't cover it.
I mean, but I'm saying that angle would be covered if it was women or if it was Chinese men. If it was anyone other than white men, I think that the labels would be applied.
So there's a couple of phenomena regarding that. So we all roughly agree to that, right? But it's not like there'd be hysteria about women, watch out for women, but they would talk so much about why are women doing this?
Pat Robertson.
Right, what is it about women?
Right,
Whereas,
because they're not at home,
right.
They need to be they need to stay at home, not spend so much time in the workplace. They don't have the capacity for that.
Of course,
for being stretched like that. Yeah.
Right, and of course the right-wingers would come out and say that biologically they're different, whereas we never have conversations about how men are biologically different, which in fact we are. We're far more violent than women. And so that's why the prisons are filled with men, right? And we do a great majority of the violent crime, etc. Part of the reason is because that's the normal. We're used to that, right? So now David thinks it also has to do with the concept of white entitlement. Let's let him explain that.
It's an important question in light of a political climate right now where there's a lot of what I've called the white victimization narrative out there. This idea that white people are being kept down, this idea that white people are being oppressed. Does this have anything to do with this? I think it's worth asking the question. I hope that the next time something bad happens, and unfortunately there will be a next time, that if it's not a white guy, that we remember that we shouldn't ascribe to entire groups the bad actions of individuals, because we're not doing that right now, and I'm not saying that we should, but we should remember that the reason we're not is because it's a form of white privilege.
And of course, for example, with Nidal Hasan, they're still talking about, oh, look at that, that's how Muslims are, and he, betrayed us at Fort Hood, etc. Well, did Jared Loughner betray us? Did the Connecticut killer betray us?
I don't remember his name, did the American sergeant in Afghanistan who killed all those children, right? He was white.
Right. And so, I think it's a very fair and interesting conversation to have, not, again, for the third time, not to blame white people, And by the way, I clarify every time in case people are confused, the most obvious thing in the world. Just because white people in the past did slavery, the Holocaust, etc., doesn't mean you did it, okay? You got nothing to do with that, right?
It's just
but what we're saying is, the next time it's a black guy or an Arab guy, don't make those assumptions because they're not warranted. Look at the record of who's actually doing the killings.
There are times, of course, to look at race and how race affects behavior and what we can learn sociologically and so forth. But, you know, skin pigmentation has never made anyone do anything.